So, various disadvantages of pride. We were on number 7. Pride attracts all punishments, namely spiritual blindness. That is where you are blind to spiritual things. All you can see is material things. Any kind of idea of sin, faith, or anything that is immaterial is foreign to you. That's hardness of heart. That means that you have no pity or mercy in your heart, even natural, you might say. And obviously hardness of heart with regard to God, to the Sacred Heart, Christ's redemption, etc. All just hardens the heart. Final impenitence, you see, where you die in your sins, which is just absolutely horrible, because even if you have sinned a great deal in life, if you have penance at the end of your life and confession, if your penance is imperfect, which often it would be in that case, but if you have even perfect contrition without confession because it's not available to you, you would still save your soul. See, so perfect contrition destroys the mortal sin in the soul. But you might have a great deal of temporal punishment due to sin as a result of that. A whole life of sin, people who live in sin, people who are divorced and remarried, etc. So the final impenitence is where they just don't want to see the priest. No, thank you. You know, it happens. The worst thing that somebody could say to you, if he is a hardened sinner or a lost of faith, is, "I'm not afraid to die." That is the worst possible thing that you could hear from their mouths. Because that means there is absolutely no spark, even of the fear of hell, the fear of judgment, all of which comes from actual grace. That means they are devoid of actual grace. Whereas someone who's very pious has a very, very strong fear of his judgment, because he's constantly reviewing his sins and his shortcomings, etc., his lack of fervor, all the things that are wrong. Just as if you go before a human judge, you're going to have what is he going to find out that's wrong with me? In other words, and you already are accusing yourself if you're in the state of sanctifying grace. But a person who is devoid of those things is just completely lost. He dies impenitent, which is a dreadful death. You might die peacefully, and with all the relatives around you and all, but you have a dreadful death, and that is you are going to face an angry God. And then you, as a result of that, you have eternal punishment, a horrifying condemnation, and an eternal hell. So that's what pride does to somebody. See, impurity doesn't do that. Avarice doesn't do that. Laziness doesn't do that. They're bad, but they don't have those horrible effects that are so universal, you might say. Killing off the entire spiritual life and killing off even in most cases, the ability to come back from it, from the pride. In most cases, it's such a deep poison. So, of all the sins, that which God punishes the most severely is pride. Now, as I have often said, people are most ashamed of sins of impurity, and they think that they are the worst sins that you could commit, and they are not. They are, in principle, always mortal sins, unless there is some defect of the act, and that means not full consent, etc., all the principles of moral theology. But if you have what we call a perfect act, they are mortal sins. That's true, but they are not the worst kind of mortal sins. Pride is a far, far worse kind. The sin of the heretic is far worse than the sin of the prostitute, let's say. Far, far worse. mean, look at the Pharisees. Look at St. Mary Magdalene versus the Pharisees. They were so hardened that they could not even see the divinity of Christ despite all his miracles. They put him to death. St. Mary Magdalene followed him, right up to the end, and she was at the foot of the cross. And she had been a terrible. And look at how quickly he released the woman caught in adultery. Go now and sin no more. But the Pharisees he blasted. Because God does punish pride terribly. And the reason is that God alone is great, and the prideful man attacks his greatness. He dethrones God. And because of that, he almost never obtains mercy. God forgets and pardons easily the sins of weakness, typically impurity and gluttony. Those are sins of weakness. Others, where we're sins of not thinking or common faults of good people. He forgets and pardons those easily, but he will only bring back somebody from sins of pride after a great deal of prayer and sacrifice on the part of somebody who cares about them, like St. Augustine, or perfect example of St. Monica. St. Ambrose, she went to St. Ambrose and said, in tears to St. Ambrose, I'm worried about my son. And his comment was, the child of so many tears will not be lost. Then you know the rest of the story. But it takes a tremendous force, you might say, of prayer and sacrifice in order to break that in somebody. St. Gregory the Great said, "We clearly recognize that pride is the most evident sign of reprobation, and humility the sign of predestination." In other words, that humility is a sign, that's not an infallible sign, but a sign that you're going to heaven, that God will give you all the necessary graces to draw you to heaven. And pride is a sign, not necessarily, but a sign of reprobation, that you will not receive those graces through your own fault and will go to hell. And all of the fathers and theologians agree with this. So, a few more, little more information on pride. There's a few different kinds of pride. One is the pride of sensitivity. He who is prideful in this way has a self-love that constantly fears being wounded. So they're sensitive. I was not invited to something, you see. They take offense easily. Things where they should not take offense. I mean, if you should have been invited, that's not wrong to say that, but or somebody didn't comment on how I looked, or somebody didn't compliment me on my sermon. That's typical fault of priests. You see, you think you gave a great sermon, and then you see some people afterwards, and nobody says anything. So, you see, that's pride. Such a person typically exaggerates injuries. So they make a mountain out of a molehill. They typically misjudge and misinterpret people's comments and actions. You looked at me the wrong way. things, absolutely silly things they interpret in a negative way. You blinked. I mean, that's very common. Or comments or actions and gestures they take in a negative way. You don't like me, do you? Because you didn't look at me or something. They carry grudges. So 25 years ago you said this to me. Women are very often guilty of that. They will bring up things to their husbands. They may have had a fight 25 years ago. And then they say, 25 years ago, you said that you didn't like what my hair looked like or something like that. So women should watch that. A grudge is, St. Alphonsus calls it a tumor mentis, a tumor of the mind. It's just as you can have a brain tumor, it's a tumor of the mind. It's something constantly nagging and making you remember, and somebody said this and this. And they carry these grudges, and they are cold to those who have offended them. And for a long time. See, 25 years ago, you said this to me, and I'm not talking to you anymore. That's against charity. Pride and charity are two opposite things. They are also convinced that others don't like them. Their superiors are unjust. See, that's the I'm not being treated right by my superior. That's a typical sign of that. Their teachers are unjust. You see, he gave me the wrong mark because I deserved a greater mark. Companions are harsh and uncharitable. This is what they think. So they find fault in people. These people are typically moody. They brood and plot revenge. All signs of this pride of sensitivity. Pride comes out in various ways, and that's one of the ways. Persons who are sensitive and easily offended, and who are suspicious and mistrustful, and who carry grudges, who imagine themselves as unwelcome, are guilty of this form of pride. Right? So that's something to remember. Also, there is the pride of superiority and the pride of timidity. The pride of superiority is the most noticeable type, expressing itself by means of haughtiness, criticism, anger, and a proneness to argue and be a know-it-all. So notice all of those things. Haughtiness, considering yourself to be above everybody else and manifesting that in various ways. Criticism, finding fault in people and institutions. Not to say that there's not faults in people and in institutions, but to look for these things, to be obsessed enough about these things that you make comments, etc. That's a sign of this pride. Anger, proneness to anger. Anger is always a manifestation of pride unless it is a justified anger. And also, even if it's justified, it must be moderate. You must always be in control of your emotions. And anger is an emotion, and it is given to us in order to overcome obstacles to the good. Think of the pole vaulter. He has to mount a lot of energy and determination in order to get over that bar. See, that's the same thing with anger. It moves us to the difficult good. The object of anger is the difficult good. So sometimes we have to show anger, like parents to children, but it must always be in control. Something like the volume on your speakers or something like that, where you turn it up and turn it down, and you're always in control. You see? If anger gets out of control, if it's excessive, or if it's unjustified, that is, you are angry about something about which you should not be angry, that is a sign of pride, a common, universal sign of pride, somebody that cannot control his anger. And as a priest, you have to control your anger. You don't want to be blasting people in a fit of anger. If you have to say something that is unpleasant and a correction, that's one thing. You might have to be strong about it and firm about it. That's fine. But if it's necessary, but you don't want to be screaming at somebody and saying all sorts of harsh things. Never do that. You're doing a lot of damage if you do that as a priest. All right. So always be in control of yourself and pray to be in control of yourself. A proneness to argue, so to be argumentative, or a spirit of contradiction, and where you get into verbal battles with people about this, that, and the other thing, and many times that will occur in priests, the theological issues, etc. It's not wrong to discuss theological issues about which you disagree, but it should always be on a high level, all right, and not call people names and things like that. Or to be a know-it-all. Remember what I said, that the seminary is a success if when you leave this building, you realize how much you don't know. Right? Not how much you know, but how much you don't know. Because you will not know a great deal, and there's a whole lifetime to learn those things. But if you're Mr. Know-it-all, where you know a few things and you think you know everything, that's also a sign of pride. Then there is the pride of timidity, on the other hand, and it is manifested by shyness, backwardness, and cowardice. We often think of shy people as humble, and they're not. This pride seeks to hide our weaknesses from ridicule. A quiet, reserved person, therefore, is not necessarily humble, but may be loaded with pride. See, a humble person will say, well, I know I'm a wreck, but this is me. He doesn't care about what people see in him or his defects, or he's not bothered by the fact that they see these defects. But a shy person, they are fearful that their defects will be revealed. And so some people are just naturally reserved, and that you shouldn't think, well, they're prideful. But a strong spirit of shyness is typically indicative of pride. Typically. So a humble person doesn't care. It doesn't care what people think about him. He has no care whatsoever, and if he smells bad or if he's, ugly or whatever his problems are, he doesn't care. That's a humble person. There was a famous story of Saint Basil, who wanted to, I think, ordain somebody a priest or a deacon, and or a brother, something. He needed somebody. He said he wanted a humble person, so he called all of these people in and said, I want to wash your feet. Oh, St. Basil, he wasn't a saint at the time. Your Excellency, you couldn't wash my feet. No. So finally he got somebody who just said, okay. And he washed his feet, and he said, you're the one that I want. See. This kind of pride that I just mentioned, the timidity, is characterized by a slavish fear of what others think of them. So, you can do some self-diagnosis in this. Also, these principles are good for diagnosing the spiritual lives of others, as you will do when you're priests, in the confessional or in spiritual direction. Because people come in with certain faults. We all do. And so to discover those faults is the science of the spiritual life. They imagine the most terrible things that could happen to them. And it is a fear of being humiliated. And shyness is a telltale symptom of this form of pride. Self-consciousness and easy embarrassment are also signs.